I enjoy video games, YouTube, staying up late, and scrolling, but I wish I was more responsible and self-disciplined. Whenever I think about changing myself, I start to think in a very serious mindset, and I start to feel like I might lose all the fun and goofiness that I feel right now. I know I have to change someday, but I never feel ready. And so this is a really common problem that a lot of people face. It's absolutely something that I struggled with myself. And if we really stop and think about it, why should we change? Right? If you're living a life today where you're enjoying yourself, you're having lots of fun, you're like waking up every day playing video games. I remember in my case, I was failing out of college, but boy, did I love every single second of it. I'm waking up every day, I'm playing video games. I used to order fried rice 2 pounds at a time to save on delivery costs. And then I could fuel myself for a 24-hour gaming binge. And I was just having such a blast. And so sometimes we kind of look at life and we start to think to ourselves, okay, I should be doing more, right? Like at some point I need to get disciplined. I need to start working. I need to start exercising. I should be doing all this stuff, but I'm just not ready to, right? I actually kind of enjoy my life. And that can be so frustrating. But if we really sort of think about it, what's going on? Why is it so hard to become disciplined in the first place? So let's play that tape through to the end. So in your mind, what's going on? Okay, I should exercise. I should put my life together. I should get a job. I should gun for promotion. I should go to graduate school. Why? What's the point of all that stuff? So let's kind of think about it, right? Okay, so if I get a job, then, okay, I'm going to make more money. If I make more money, I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to grind. I'm going to spend all these years. I'm going to work 60 hours a week. I'm going to make more and more money. I'm going to get more and more promoted. For what reason? So I can retire early. And then once you retire early, what are you going to do? I'm going to have fun. Well, what do you enjoy? What do you enjoy doing? What's fun for you? It's playing video games and watching YouTube and scrolling and just like relaxing and chilling and not doing anything. And this is a really common problem. We all struggle with sort of having things that we want, but feeling like we should be more disciplined. So this is the really wild thing, right? Is we like kind of know we should get disciplined. We know we should be studying harder, maybe applying for more jobs, gunning for promotion, whatever. But the truth of the matter is that oftentimes we're just not ready for it, right? We actually really enjoy our life right now. So let's say that, okay, you did get disciplined, right? Let's say you did it. Hey, I'm going to like wake up every day. I'm going to work out. I'm going to go to work early. I'm going to be like grinding for like, I'm grinding at school. I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to go to graduate school, whatever. You do that for a while. You get paid more money, right? You get paid more money. You grind. You get promoted again and again and again. And what's the point of working so hard? So that you can retire early. And let's say you make so much bank that you can retire early. And then what are you going to do with your time? Well, then I'm going to have fun. Like, okay, so what do you enjoy doing? Well, I enjoy playing video games. I enjoy watching YouTube. I enjoy like sitting around and scrolling on my phone. And so then your brain is kind of thinking, well, hold on a second. Like if the goal of grinding really hard is so that you can retire early and have a good time, but what you enjoy doing is like actually sitting at home and playing video games, like why on earth would you go through all that trouble when you can actually do that right now? Because our brain has this like circuit that constantly calculates the cost and benefit of our actions. So this is the circuit that sort of tells us, okay, hey, we need to go to the bathroom now because we're going to be in the car for 3 hours. And going to the bathroom now, even though I don't feel like it, it's going to cost me more down the road to go to the bathroom later than it would to go to the bathroom now. So this is a really basic circuit that like is integrated with all kinds of physiologic signals like hunger and thirst and needing to use the restroom. But it also does things like abstract tasks, right? So it thinks about, okay, what's the cost of studying versus the benefit of playing video games today? And anytime you're looking at that cost-benefit analysis, that part of your brain is like, why would I want to grind when I enjoy the rest of my life when I can just enjoy my life today? I can just have dopamine today. I can enjoy myself and it's going to be great. And so this is the really tricky thing is that your brain is actually kind of saying, and if you really kind of think about it, right, you say you're not ready to change yet, which is a really, really good self-aware kind of statement. And why? Because what's the point? Because at the end of the day, we're going to end up just doing this anyway. And so how do human beings actually get disciplined? Right? Because when you've got the joy of doom scrolling, watching YouTube and playing video games versus all of its hard work, like what's it for? And what we sort of discover is that there's one really important thing that actually causes human beings to be disciplined. And that's something called a competing interest. And we know this because we've done lots of research on people with addictions. And I'd love to tell you all just a simple example of this, okay? And so I had this patient who had a skiing injury and then started on opiate medication, and they had a genetic vulnerability to it, so they got addicted to it. Super high functioning person, really, really capable. And so I kind of told them, I was like, hey, if you need to if you need to get off of opiates, like we probably need to like hospitalize you and like give you pain medications and things like that. But they were in a situation where they couldn't afford to do that. If people found out that they were getting substance use treatment, their job would have all kinds of problems and stuff. So they're like, you know what? I'm going to do it cold turkey. I'm going to do it home. And the nice thing about opioid withdrawal is that it's not as life-threatening or medically dangerous as something like withdrawing from alcohol, which can actually be lethal. So they just decided that they wanted to quit cold turkey. And it was one of the most painful experiences of their life. And so if you kind of think about it, how is a human being able to do that? So if you think about the discipline that's required to withdraw off of opiates cold turkey or quit smoking or all these other kinds of things, right? Because if you think about all that stuff, all these addictive substances, what do? They increase our enjoyment, right? They give us dopamine, they give us all this stuff. So how is it that human beings are able to pay that price? And that's the problem with not being ready for discipline, is we're not ready to pay the price for discipline. We're not ready to pay the price to get promoted, to go to graduate school, to get in shape, right? We're just not ready yet. And so how do you become ready? You develop something called a competing interest. And so what we learn from getting off of substances is people have to have a good reason to do it. So they have to have something called a competing interest, which is that I have to want something more than the pain of getting off of this substance. And so in your life, if you're not ready for discipline, what you really need to figure out is what is worth the pain to you, right? And this is where we fall into another trap. This is why this problem is so common right now, because right now, where do our wants come from? Our wants and our desires come from the outside. And if you're someone who's struggling to get disciplined because you're not ready, or you do it like kind of half-heartedly and then you give up, where is your desire for discipline coming from? Is it coming from in here, or is it coming from societal expectations? I should do this, my parents are doing this, my friends are doing this. And this is the problem, is that all that crap from the outside, and our world is becoming more and more focused on fulfilling like external desires. Right now, it's like we have advertisements, we have personalized advertisements. All these websites are tracking you, right? So they're telling you all the time what you want. So this game company is like, hey, you really want this game. And now if you kind of think about it, we have these like big launches for video games where like we've got 3 trailers and there's so much hype, and we have conventions and they're like, hey, you want this game? Hey, you want this game? And now all these like streamers get early access codes to games, right? So for like a year before the game comes out, the world is telling you, hey, you want this stuff. Hey, you want this stuff. And your parents are telling you, you should do this, you should do this. Your friends are telling you, you should do this, you should do this. You look at everyone else around you and everyone's telling you what you should do, what you should want. But none of that stuff is a competing interest, because it all comes from the outside. And so we as a society have forgotten how to find what we care about. So if you're not ready to get disciplined, it's never going to work as long as you're developing the discipline for someone else. And some of y'all may have even grown up in situations where your parents were very controlling, right? And they tried to instill discipline. But if someone is forcing you to study or forcing you to work or forcing you to do anything, that's not actually discipline. It's actually the exact opposite, because these are external forces that are controlling your behavior. The point of discipline is that it's an internal force that overcomes your barriers. And so this can be really confusing for a lot of people, because even if they've been pressured and they've been successful, they can sometimes have no discipline at all. And anytime they're left to kind of self-start, they struggle with it. So what do we do about this? So the first thing is, like I said, acknowledge for a moment that a lot of what you want, right? Not the games and stuff, because that's actually what you want. That's how you want to spend your time, which is why you move towards it, right? And that's also why you're willing to sacrifice things like external respect or money, because you're actually fulfilling your own desires there. So how can we start to cultivate healthier desires that sort of qualify as this competing interest, that allow us to pay the price to develop discipline? So the first question that I have for you is, what do you want? And if your answer to that question is, I don't know, then that's a diagnostic sign that your mind has been so clouded by external desires. You've been so influenced by advertising and personalized cookies that you don't even know what you want. The world is telling you what you want, okay? So then the next question that we've got to ask you is, do you want to change? And if you really pay attention to yourself, what you may find there is actually you're going to say, no, I don't want to change yet. I don't want to change now. And then you may sort of say, well, okay, if I don't want to change, then I'm screwed, right? No, don't worry about it. We're going to help you out. So then there's one more question you can ask yourself. Do you want to change? Do you wish you did want to change? And then you may find a slightly different answer, right? Chances are we're moving closer to yes. And if the answer to that question is yes, I wish I was different. I wish I wanted to change. So now we found something actually really, really important. Even though you don't want to change, you wish that you wanted to change. And now we found something the world is not telling you that, right? The world is not telling you, hey, you need to change. Maybe they are, but they're not sort of going one level above. Do you wish you were a different person and that you wanted to change? And if the answer to that question is yes, now we've got something really important. So usually when we think about the person that we want to be, there's a laundry list of stuff. I want to exercise. I want to eat healthy. I want to put more money in my savings account. I want to go to graduate school. I want to grind more. I want to write a book. There's this laundry list of crap, okay, that we come up with. And what you want to do is write that stuff down on a piece of paper and then go through it and then ask yourself, okay, is this something that I actually want, or is this something that was instilled within me? Is this a want that was transplanted from advertising or parental expectations or societal expectations, or does this really come from me? And what you'll find is that 90% of the stuff on your list doesn't actually come from you. What you're going to end up with is hopefully one thing. Just start with one thing that you actually want. And if you can find that one thing that you actually want, stop and just sit with that for a second. And then what I really want you to focus on is try to do whatever you can to start that thing in the smallest way possible. Think for a moment about the person that you want to be, not the person that society wants you to be. How do you want to be different? And I'm not saying giving up video games or YouTube or any of that stuff. I'm saying okay, so if you want to be a little bit physically healthier, then go for a walk every day. Start with the smallest thing. Do 5 push-ups. Do 2 push-ups. Do 1 push-up. Whatever that smallest thing is, do something, pick something that you can do and that you can actually be sort of satisfied with yourself at the end, right? Because now you're actually moving towards something that you genuinely want. Now, if you try to do this, you're going to run into a pitfall. And maybe you're running into it already. And that pitfall is, but it's not enough. So this is where your mind is going to be super sneaky and it's going to tell you this doesn't make a difference. Because what difference does 2 push-ups make, right? We have all this laundry list of things to do. And so we have to be really careful here. And this is so kind of twisty and sneaky that it's easy to lose y'all. So really try to pay attention to this, okay? When your mind tells you that, the first thing is, what is your mind telling you to do? Your mind is trying to convince you that you should want all of this stuff because all of those habits or all of those desires have been implanted within you, right? So it's trying to trick you into telling you that this isn't enough. The other thing that's really interesting, though, is that when it tells you those things, what is it actually trying to convince you to do? It's trying to tell you, oh, you can't just do 1%. You need to go 100% or nothing, because your mind knows you're not going to go 100%. So what your mind is actually doing in that moment is trying to convince you to do nothing and just continue doing exactly what you're doing because it's doing the cost-benefit analysis, and it's kind of saying, hey, actually, we can get a ton of benefit by just watching YouTube and playing video games every day, so don't bother with that other crap. It never works. We've tried it before, right? And so we know it's not worth it. So you've got to be super careful about that pitfall. Just notice what it's kind of trying to accomplish. Notice that it's kind of trying to keep you stuck. And the reason that it's kind of trying to keep you stuck, because the mind does this really interesting trick, is that it convinces you that you don't want to change. That's what it's trying to do, right? It's saying it's not worth it. And if it's not worth it, then we don't want to do it. And if we don't want to do it, we can continue doing what we're doing. So this is what's so tricky, is that sort of lack of readiness actually comes from the mind. There's one pitfall that we have to worry about, though. If you pick one thing and you start to do a tiny little amount that is aligned with what you want, your mind is actually going to try to pull a really interesting trick on you. The second you start to move forward with something that you want, your mind is going to remind you of all the stuff that you should be doing, because it's going to get all tangled up and it's going to say you should be doing this, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. So doing 2 push-ups a day or walking 15 minutes a day isn't going to be enough. So it's interesting because the second you start to develop forward momentum, the mind will actually trick you by sort of telling you, hey, it's not enough. And what your mind is going to tell you is that it has to be all or nothing. And we can kind of see that in the post. And if you pay attention to yourself, usually when you try to make a change, you try to overhaul your life. So why does the mind do this? Why does the mind tell you that it's all or nothing? Because the mind knows, hey, if I make it all or nothing, this dumbass is going to choose nothing. And if this person chooses nothing, remember it's got that cost-benefit analysis running. If we don't bother with all this crap, what do we end up doing instead? We end up playing video games. We end up watching YouTube. We end up scrolling. We end up having a great time, getting a ton of dopamine. And by the way, because we've already done the calculation, right? So if we start to do all of this catastrophic, amazing change, we're going to end up in this place anyway. So I'm looking out for you. That's what your mind is saying. I'm going to save you all the trouble, and we're going to jump right to the end of the movie right now. We're going to just retire right here, right? Because if you're a degenerate who's playing tons of video games and you don't want to change, what are you actually doing? You're retiring at the age of 22. And who wouldn't want to retire at the age of 22? Everyone wants to retire at the age of 22. And your mind is like, hey, you don't need to actually make any money because this stuff is cheap. There's free to play games. We're actually set. I'm going to help you retire right now. All you need to do to retire right now is don't worry about all that crap that you should do. So I'm going to convince you that you don't need to do any of it. So you got to watch out for that pitfall because it's waiting for you and it's what's kept you stuck this entire time. So just to kind of summarize, it's really normal for us to enjoy the life that we have right now because our society is designed that way, right? Games are getting like more interesting. When I was growing up, when I was like 7 years old, 8 years old, you couldn't game 24 hours a day because you had limited access to games. You had to go and buy a cartridge and put it in your Nintendo Entertainment System. You could play that game for 20, 30 hours and then you're done. And then there aren't more games to play. Nowadays, we have an endless amount of entertainment. And then what we sort of tell ourselves is, okay, like I should do all of this stuff, right? But then there's a part of your brain that's actually playing that tape through to the end, even if you haven't. And it's saying, okay, why should we do that stuff? So we can get more money. Why do we want more money? So we can retire early. Why do we want to retire early? So we can do what we want. What do we want to do? We want to play video games. Why on earth would I waste 30 years when I can actually jump straight to that right now? And this is why we're not ready to change. The other thing to consider is that if we really do want to develop discipline, that comes at a cost, right? Exercising, eating healthy, working hard, those come at very high costs. So how is it that human beings develop the capacity to pay those costs, develop the willingness to pay those costs? That comes from a competing interest. And this is why things are so hard right now, because it's so hard to know what you want. Why is it hard to know what you want? Because the world is brainwashing you to want other things, right? But when a video game company is trying to sell you stuff, they're thinking about their own interests. They don't care about whether you stay at home and, become degenerate. So our society has made it so that we've forgotten or lost the capacity to even know what we want. And so start with that list of shoulds, and parents can kind of do that kind of stuff too, right? Where they tell you, you should look a certain way, you should have this kind of job in society. Instagram and like all these other social media things, magazines, movies, they're telling you should look a certain way or dress a certain way. So they're shoving what you want at you, but it's not really what you want. It's what they want you to want. And so how do you get around that? There's a really important question you can ask yourself is, even if you don't want to change today, so be honest with yourself. Do I want to change? No. Am I ready to change? No. Do I want to become disciplined? No. So be it. Do you wish you were someone that wanted to change? And if the answer to that question is yes, then come up with a list of all the crap that you should do and try to find a single thing that you actually care about and move one step towards it. But be careful, because your mind will create a pitfall, because it'll tell you it's not enough. We have to do everything. So be super careful about that pitfall of your mind. Really focus on what you want and try to implement the tiniest change possible.
For more great podcasts, go to pickaxe.uk. Pickaxe.
Every year that goes by, it's harder and harder to be a good Asian kid. And chances are your parents actually don't care. If you look at things across the board, it's harder to be at the top of your class. It's harder to get straight A's. It's harder to get into good colleges. All kinds of jobs are actually getting more and more competitive now. So it used to be that you needed a good degree from an Ivy League institution to get a job at a top tier company like Google. But now you actually don't even need a college degree. And so Asian kids in particular are kind of getting crunched. And we're seeing this in the form of a mental health crisis for Asian kids. The simplest way that this is manifesting is incredibly high suicide rates. People between the ages of 20 and 24, for most Americans, it's actually accidents that's the number one cause of death. But since Asian kids are so freaking careful, right? You guys are not going to put yourselves in accident-prone situations. So actually the thing that you have to be the most careful around is yourself. Suicide rates are incredibly high, and that's just one manifestation of the Asian American mental health crisis. So let's take a look at how some of these things intersect. And we're going to start off by looking at, is it actually getting harder to be a successful Asian kid? And this is where, unfortunately, the answer is yes. So we're going to take one simple statistic. So if you look at medical college admissions tests amongst ethnicities, what you find is that if you want to get into med school in the US and you're an Asian kid, you have to score in the top 23% of pre-med students. So you have to be in the top 23 out of 100 to actually get into medical school. If you're Caucasian, you still have to be in the top maybe 30 to 35% of students who are applying to medical school. If you're Latino, you actually have to be, you can be in the bottom half. So you have to be in the top 54%, which means that you just have to outperform 46 other students out of 100. And if you're Black or African American, you have to be in the top 73%, which means you just have to beat 23 out of 100 kids to get into med school. I want to take a moment to thank our HG coaches. I've taught at a lot of different places and worked with a lot of different people. And honestly, our coaches are some of the best people I've ever worked with. HG coaches have helped over 10,000 people find purpose, direction, and improve their mental health. After about 20 weeks of coaching, the average client experiences a 58% improvement in sense of purpose in life, a 45% improvement in feelings of anxiety, and even a 35% reduction in feelings of despair. And this isn't just me saying this. At this point, we've done this for 3 years, run 6 research studies, and even presented our findings at the American Psychiatric Association National Conference. Over 100,000 sessions later, I can confidently say this works. So if you're interested in checking out HE coaching for yourself, go to healthygamer.gg/coaching to learn more. Now, I'm not saying that this policy is necessarily bad. So there are a lot of things that go into being a good doctor and forming a good application for medical school. And I'll be the first one to say that I think it's a great idea to have a lot of people in medical school who are not necessarily great test takers. There's a lot more to being a doctor than taking a test. At the same time, though, I think it's really important to acknowledge that if you look at it objectively, if you're an Asian kid who's applying to med school, you have to far outperform every other ethnicity. We're talking about some ethnicities that can even be in the bottom half of applicants, or even close to the bottom quarter of applicants and still get into med school, whereas you have to be in the top 23%. So objectively, achieving the goals that your parents may set out for you or that you may set out for you is actually really hard. The other problem that Asian Americans tend to deal with is this idea of a model minority myth. And if you grew up as an Asian kid, you kind of know that like people are like, oh, so you're Asian? That means you must be good at math. But the truth of the matter is that Asian Americans or Asians in general are not like better or worse at anything than any other ethnicity. Similarly, it's not like Black kids are better or worse or smarter or stupider than any other ethnicity. What we know from a ton of data about ethnicity is that there's a large variation within the population, and that a particular race is not associated with any sort of particular performance. The challenge is that if you're an Asian kid, people measure you up and expect a lot more from you. And that puts a lot of pressure on us, especially when it comes from places like our parents. So we sort of know that Asian kids face a lot of this pressure, and this leads to a lot of stress. The problem is that as Asian kids are facing all of this pressure to succeed, and they don't necessarily have particular advantages at achieving that success, they get kind of crunched and it affects their mental health. It's bad enough that Asian Americans may actually have objective things going against them that makes it hard for them to succeed. But the real problem is that from a cultural perspective and family perspective, oftentimes our parents actually don't give a crap, right? They don't actually care that you're disadvantaged when applying to medical school. They just want you to be a doctor. And so now what we're going to dive into is some of the attitudes that result in this Asian American mental health crisis. The first thing that we're going to talk about is a high pressure for success. So a lot of us have parents who expect a lot from us, right? They actually don't really care about why we can't do something or even what we want to do. They expect us to succeed kind of no matter what. And if you're an Asian kid, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. You should succeed because I think you should succeed. Now, the next problem that we tend to run into, if you sort of look at Asian American cultures, is that we're all about saving face. So if you look at other people who struggle, so everyone's facing the same environment, right? So the world is getting harder for everybody. And then the question kind of becomes, well, if the world is getting harder for everybody, why is it that Asian American suicide is at an all-time high and y'all are number one, or we're number one, right? We did it. We're number one. What's going on there? Why is it that a harder situation in the world is affecting Asian Americans specifically? And that has a lot to do with our culture and expectations. So we're going to dive into some cultural beliefs that make it hard for Asian Americans to get help and therefore deal with all of the problems in the world. The first thing is a very, very high reliance on personal responsibility, right? So like generally speaking, if you're an Asian kid or Asian American, if there's some problem in life, like you're responsible for fixing it, like especially if it's internal, right? Because getting help for stuff, like it's okay to get help for like math tutoring so you can be at the top of your class because you go to Kumon class and whatever, right? That's okay. But any kind of personal deficiency that you have or any kind of struggle that you have, first of all, is equated to a personal deficiency, because if you didn't get an A, that's your fault, right? Forget about the situation, forget about the environment. There's an emphasis on personal responsibility for everything. So there's no appreciation for environmental struggles, like your parents don't care that you're getting bullied. Your parents don't care that you need glasses. Your parents don't care about any of that stuff. They don't care that you have ADHD. They don't care that you have depression. Like that stuff isn't real. Like if there is a problem in your life, you should be able to fix it on your own, right? So that's the first belief that we've got to be super careful about. The second issue that's really, really concerning is a lot of Asian Americans and families care a lot about saving face. So this is also where if you're struggling, first of all, you've got to fix it yourself. And secondly, you better not ask anybody else for help, because what if people find out? Oh my God, you're depressed? Like you better not see a therapist. What if someone finds out that you see a therapist? What if someone, what if you tell someone? No, oh my God, that would be so embarrassing. Because if you were seeing a therapist or if you were getting help for problems, that would reflect poorly on us as parents. That means that we're not raising you right? This other kid down the street, oh, that boy down the street, he's not in therapy and he's getting A's and his parents smack him more than I smack you. Like, what is your problem? We can't let anybody know. And so since there's this emphasis on saving face, it means that you can't go to other people for help, right? Because that's incredibly embarrassing and makes us look bad. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Not only are you screwing up, now you're going to make us look bad? That's a terrible idea. And the last thing that is actually kind of really unfortunate is that from an Asian American culture, oftentimes we only care about fixing what we can see. So Asian parents especially, like, they're totally fine getting you medical care because there's a broken bone and they can see that the bone is broken. They're totally fine getting you a math tutor because they can see the grade, right? It's a B instead of an A, or a B plus instead of an A. And like, that's unacceptable. But if you really look at Asian American parents and culture, we really prioritize things that we can see. And the problem is that with a lot of mental health struggles, you can't see them, right? What does it look like from the outside? Why are you so lazy? Get up. You should get up on time. You need to be studying more. I don't care. You should be sitting there at the desk and learn to concentrate. Just focus. Just do it. Just focus. Just do it. If they can't see it, it isn't real. And this sort of puts Asian kids in an incredibly tough spot because it's difficult for you to have a language to articulate what you're struggling with. And furthermore, since you can't show it to your parents, they don't take it seriously. If you're hearing what I'm saying, hopefully some of this stuff is resonating with you. Hopefully you sort of recognize that the world is becoming a slightly more difficult place. Maybe your parents are putting way too much responsibility on you, and that you feel a little bit embarrassed or even actively discouraged from seeking help. So what do we do about this situation? Before we get there, I want to start by sort of doing a little cognitive test. So I'm going to say a couple things, and I want you to pay attention to your reaction, okay? The first thing is that, hey, it's okay to get help, right? Like, you don't have to live life all on your own. It's like totally fine for you to get help. You should seek help. You deserve help. And pay attention to what your reaction is. If you kind of agreed with me intellectually, like, yeah, like it is okay for people who are struggling to get help. It's not okay for me to get help. I should be able to do it on my own, right? Like I get that Dr. K is saying that it's okay for people to get help, but I should be able to do it on my own, right? I don't know if I really need help. I don't know if I deserve help. If that was your reaction, that's just a sign that you've been conditioned by this sort of like Asian American culture or Asian culture to over rely on personal responsibility. Okay? So let's try another one. The world is objectively getting harder, right? It's okay that you're not as successful as maybe you quote unquote should be. Maybe actually the level of success that you have right now is appropriate. Maybe the reason that you're not at the top of your class is because you genuinely have a very hard life. What's your reaction to that? Well, let's try this on for size. Yeah, but other people are able to do it, right? So, hey, you're saying, Dr. K, that the world is getting harder, but Sejal is still able to get straight A's? If your mind jumps to comparison and says, oh, but you're saying that everything is getting harder for everybody, I should be doing better. And how do I know I should be doing better? Because other people are doing better. They're able to do it. So why shouldn't I be able to do it? If your mind jumps to comparison, when I talk about, oh my God, things are actually hard for you, and you say, yeah, but someone else is able to do it, that once again is Asian conditioning. Because what do Asian parents do? Oh, this person is getting straight A, that person is getting straight A, this person is getting straight A, and is winner of chess tournament. You got second place in chess tournament and second place in maths, and they are getting number one place in everything. Why can't you be like them? And you can't say, well, maybe because their parents are emotionally supportive and actually help them instead of making them feel small and want to kill themselves. But you can't say that, right? So that's test number 2. Like, what's your reaction when I say, hey, the world is genuinely getting harder, and like maybe you're actually doing pretty well for your circumstances. If you turn to someone else, then like maybe that's a sign that you've been conditioned in this negative way. The last thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is if I say, okay, you should get help, and let's say that you bypass the first 2 cognitive traps, then you're going to kind of say, well, it's expensive, right? I don't really know. How do I know it's worth it? Right? Because this is the third thing. I was once reading a paper on psychotherapy of Asian Americans specifically. And there's this really great quote where this one girl is like, every time I go to the therapist, all I'm thinking about is that this is costing my parents $5 a minute. Every minute that goes by, my parents are losing $5, $5, $5, $5. That's all I can think about the whole time I'm there. And am I using that $5 well enough? So if you're thinking about, if I tell you to get help and your reaction is, well, like, I don't know if it's going to be worth it. How do I know if it's worth it? So let's think about that for a second, because this, I think, is going to be revealing. So if you don't think that the help is worth it, sometimes people don't think that the help is worth it because they don't deserve help. Like, how much is this really going to help me? Is this going to help me 10%, 20%, 30%? I don't know if it's worth it. And this is what's really tricky is like, even if it isn't worth it, do you deserve the help anyway? Like, is it worth it for you to go see a therapist? Like, do you deserve to feel better about yourself? Do you deserve for life to be a little bit easier? And this is actually what's so devastating is when we're raised in a culture that places our value as human beings on our accomplishments or relative to other human beings. When your parents say you are worth less than this kid down the street because they got a 4.0 and you got a 3.9. That does something very damaging to your self-esteem. And once you believe that you are not a good human being, then you are less worth investing in, right? Because if there's a 4.0 kid who has a problem, if he's at the top of the class and number one in this and number one in this and number one in this, they're worth investing in, right? Because the return on your investment is going to be so high. But if you're an ordinary Asian kid who has super ordinary expectations on them, then you are going to feel like any kind of help may not be worth it. If you are worth more, then it's worth more investing, right? Makes perfect sense. And this is actually what's so devastating, because this is what keeps Asian American kids from reaching out for help, because they're afraid that they're not going to be worth enough. It's not going to be help them enough. And that's what's so devastating about it. And so now the last question is, okay, so like, what do we do about this, right? Because we sort of know all kinds of stuff, that there's Asian American mental health crisis. Suicide rates are very high. By the way, if you look at statistics on like Asian women, for example, they are the number one buyer of self-help books, right? So when they have a problem, it's personal responsibility. I shouldn't tell a damn soul. I'm going to order something from the dark parts of the internet on self-help and dealing with depression and all this kind of stuff, because no one can know. So the first thing that I'm going to say is you should get help. And all of those problems that we just talked about are going to crop up again. You're going to have those kinds of thoughts. Do I deserve it? Oh, like, but what if it doesn't work? Like, all those kinds of thoughts are going to crop up. The next thing to think a little bit about is I'm going to ask you a little bit about what you want. So what do you want from life? Because the challenge here is that if you're an Asian kid, what you want has been like serially beaten out of you your entire life. Because if you're an Asian American kid, if you're an Asian kid, you grow up in a household and what you want is like the least important thing in the universe. So like if you wanted to learn bass guitar or saxophone, like, what are you talking about, kid? It's like piano or violin. Like if you want to be a real rebel, you learn the cello, I guess. It's like you got to learn one instrument, you got to do one extracurricular, you got to do math club, debate club maybe, and then you can learn one sport, and they're approved sports. You can't learn lacrosse. You can be like a competitive swimmer, you can learn tennis, like there are a couple of sports that you can do, but you can't do basketball. That's crazy. Soccer, like, I don't think so. Maybe soccer. There's the pre-approved things. And so your whole life, what you want has been knocked out of you. And so what do Asian kids do? They rebel in secret ways. Yeah, my parents